I never knew what it felt like to be invisible until I married the woman of my dreams. You see, she came from money. Old money. The kind of wealth that doesn't just sit in bank accounts, it flows through generations like blood through veins, giving power and purpose to everyone it touches. Her family's name opened doors that most people didn't even know existed, and when I married her, she thought she was marrying down. She thought she was saving me. If you enjoy dramatic stories about hidden identities and shocking revelations, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We post new dramatic narratives every week that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Now, let's dive into this story. My name is Daniel, and this is the story of the night my life changed forever. I met Victoria at a gallery opening in the city. She was standing in front of a painting, some abstract piece that I didn't really understand, wearing a black dress that cost more than my monthly rent. I watched her for a full minute before I worked up the courage to approach her. When I did, I didn't tell her anything about who I really was. I didn't tell her about my family's wealth, our investments, our real estate empire. I didn't tell her about the controlling stake my family held in one of the country's most profitable manufacturing corporations. I simply told her that I worked in consulting, that I enjoyed art, and that I thought she looked absolutely stunning in that dress. She smiled. That smile changed everything. 3 months of dating became 6 months. 6 months became a year. And somewhere along the way, Victoria fell in love with who she thought I was. A kind, humble man who didn't have much but had a good heart. She fell in love with the idea of rescuing someone beneath her station. Her parents, of course, were horrified when she told them she was dating me. But Victoria was the kind of woman who did what she wanted. She always had been. When I proposed, I did it simply. No flashy diamond, no public declaration, just me, on one knee in our apartment, with a ring that I'd spent months choosing. It wasn't the most expensive ring in the world, but it was real, and it came from the deepest part of who I was. She said yes without hesitation. She cried, actually. Real tears of joy. Her parents sent us a wedding invitation. That was how we found out they were cutting off her allowance. They sent a formal letter along with it, explaining that Victoria had made deeply unfortunate choices and that they could not in good conscience support a union that would compromise the family's standing. Her mother tried to soften the blow by suggesting that perhaps I would come to my senses and leave Victoria to find someone more appropriate. Her father didn't bother with pleasantries. He simply stated that he hoped I understood that I would never be welcome in their home and that Victoria would regret this decision for the rest of her life. Victoria cried again when she read it, but this time they were different tears. These were tears of hurt, of feeling abandoned by the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. I held her while she sobbed, and I made a decision in that moment. I would not tell her the truth about my family, not yet. Maybe not ever. She had chosen me over everything she knew. She had sacrificed her relationship with her family, her inheritance, her entire world, because she loved the man she believed me to be. I couldn't take that away from her. I couldn't let her think that she'd made the sacrifice for nothing. We got married quietly, just the two of us and 2 witnesses we'd hired from a temp agency. No family, no guests, no grand ceremony. Just love, pure and simple. Victoria wore a simple white dress that she'd bought on sale. I wore a suit that I'd owned for 3 years. And when the judge pronounced us husband and wife, I felt like the richest man in the world. For 5 years, we built a life together. A real life. We rented a modest apartment. Victoria worked as a freelance designer, making enough money to cover her expenses and contribute to our household. I worked in my consulting business, which was technically true. I did consult on various corporate matters for my family's company, but I kept it vague, and Victoria never asked for details. We went to dinner at affordable restaurants. We took trips to places we could afford. We made love and made plans and made a life that was built on honesty, even though it wasn't complete honesty. The whole time, I received regular reports from my family's company. I attended board meetings via video conference late at night, after Victoria had gone to bed. I made decisions that affected thousands of lives, but she had no idea. I kept 2 phones. One was for her, one was for everything else. It was a lie, but it was a lie told out of love. And then, one evening in early December, Victoria came home with something I hadn't expected. She was nervous. I could tell immediately. She had that look she got when she was about to tell me something important, the same look she'd had when she told me she was pregnant before a miscarriage took that joy away. The same look she'd had when she told me her mother had reached out for the first time in 3 years, asking to meet for coffee. "My parents want to have dinner with us," she said, standing in our kitchen with her coat still on. "A formal dinner, at their house." My stomach dropped. "What did you tell them?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "I said yes," she said. "Daniel, I know they treated you badly. I know they said horrible things, but they're still my parents. And I think maybe they're ready to apologize. Maybe they've realized they were wrong about you." I didn't believe that for a second. Victoria's parents were not the type of people who apologized. They were the type of people who crushed anyone who stood in their way. But I looked at my wife's hopeful face, and I couldn't tell her no. I couldn't tell her that I didn't trust them. I couldn't tell her that I was terrified of what might happen. So I said, "Okay, when? Saturday, 7 o'clock, dress nice." Saturday came too quickly. I wore a charcoal suit that I'd bought years ago for a family function that Victoria knew nothing about. It fit me perfectly. I looked like a man of money and power. I looked like myself. But when I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize the expression on my face. I looked afraid. "You look so handsome," Victoria said, buttoning the top button of my shirt. She was wearing a blue dress that brought out her eyes. She'd curled her hair. She was nervous too, but she was trying to hide it, trying to be brave. I drove us to her parents' house in my car, a 2012 Honda Civic that I'd bought used. It was a short drive, but it felt like we were traveling through time, moving further and further away from the life we'd built together and back into the world where I was nothing, and she was everything. The house loomed ahead of us, a massive Victorian mansion in the wealthy part of the city. I'd been inside once before, years ago when we were first dating. Victoria's mother had thrown a fundraiser. I'd gone as a guest of a friend. I remembered thinking it was the coldest place I'd ever been, despite the marble fireplaces and the roaring fires. Victoria's father answered the door. His name was Charles Ashford. He was a tall man with gray hair and the kind of face that had been handsome once, before bitterness had carved permanent lines into it. He looked at me like I was something he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "Daniel," he said, not extending his hand for a handshake. "Come in." The dining room was exactly as I remembered it. Crystal chandeliers, mahogany furniture, a table that could seat 20 people with only 4 place settings. This was deliberate. This was meant to make me feel small. Victoria's mother, Eleanor, was already seated at the head of the table. She stood when we entered, kissed Victoria on the cheek, and gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "How wonderful to see you both," she said, in a tone that suggested it was anything but wonderful. We sat down. Dinner was served by a woman I'd never seen before. Roasted lamb with rosemary, vegetables that had been arranged to look like art, wine that cost more than my weekly salary. Nobody spoke for several minutes. The only sounds were the clink of silverware and the occasional sip of wine. Then Charles spoke. "Victoria tells us that you're still in consulting, Daniel. That must be profitable." "It provides," I said simply. "That's not what I asked," he said. "I asked if it was profitable. There's a difference between providing and prospering." I met his eyes. "Yes, I prosper." Eleanor laughed, a thin, bitter sound. "On what, exactly?" "Victoria's design work barely covers her personal expenses. I assume you're not making so much that you can afford a proper home." "We're comfortable," Victoria interjected, "and I like our apartment. It's ours." "It's rented," Charles said flatly. "I had my people look into it. You rent, you drive used cars, you eat at restaurants that cost less than the bottles of wine we're drinking tonight. You're not prospering, Daniel. You're surviving." I set down my fork and knife. "Is that why you invited us here? To remind us of our financial status?" "No," Eleanor said. "We invited you here because we've come to a realization." Charles nodded. He stood up and walked over to a side table. He opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. A physical, old-fashioned envelope. He walked back to the table and slid it across the white tablecloth toward me. It made a soft whooshing sound as it traveled, and everything in the room seemed to hold its breath. "Open it," Charles said. I didn't move. "Open it," Eleanor echoed. "Please." Victoria grabbed my arm. "Daniel, what is this?" I opened the envelope. Inside was a check, a large check, the kind of check that could change a person's life. It was made out to me. No, it was made out to me and Victoria. The amount was $300,000. Below the check was a letter, written in neat handwriting on expensive paper. "Dear Daniel and Victoria, we have given this matter considerable thought. While we initially objected to Victoria's choice of husband, we have come to understand that your union is, as we must accept, permanent. However, we also understand that you are struggling financially. We cannot, in good conscience, allow our daughter to continue living in poverty. Therefore, we are offering you the following. This check represents a generous settlement. We ask only one thing in return, that you allow Victoria to divorce you and return to her family. Your refusal would be understood as greed, not as love. We trust you will make the right choice. Signed, Charles and Eleanor Ashford." I read it twice. Then I read it again. And all the while, Victoria was saying my name, asking me what it said, asking me what was happening. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. I slid the envelope back across the table toward Charles. "No," I said. "No?" Eleanor's voice rose. "You're turning down $300,000. "Yes," I said. "Why would you do that?" Charles asked, his voice filled with genuine confusion. I looked at my wife. She was crying, not understanding what was happening, just knowing that something terrible was occurring. "Because," I said, "she's worth infinitely more than that." Charles's face turned purple. "You arrogant fool! You think you're noble? You're not noble. You're stupid. You're dragging my daughter down into mediocrity, and now you have the audacity to refuse my generosity." "It wasn't generosity," I said quietly. "It was an insult dressed up in checks and official paper." "You don't understand what you're refusing," Eleanor said. Her voice had changed. Now it carried a note of something else. Fear, maybe, or warning. "We have friends. People who can make your life very difficult. People who can take things away from you." I felt something inside me shift. Some part of me that had been dormant for 5 years suddenly woke up. I was tired of this. Tired of pretending to be less than I was. Tired of letting people like them walk over me. "Tell me something," I said, and my voice was steady now, calm. "What company do you work for, Charles?" "What?" He seemed thrown off by the question. "Your company, the manufacturing firm, Ashford Industries. What is your role there?" "I'm the CEO," he said, bristling. "Not that it's any of your business." "Right," I said. "CEO. Interesting." I pulled out my phone. Victoria watched me with confusion. I opened my email and found the document I'd been reading just that morning. A quarterly earnings report from Ashford Industries, with my signature on it, as the primary shareholder. I turned the phone around and showed it to Charles. The blood drained from his face. "What is this?" he whispered. "That," I said, "is a document outlining the financial performance of Ashford Industries for the past quarter. It's signed by me because I own 28% of your company's shares, which makes me, technically, one of your major investors. Your family owns another 35%, which means, between the two of us, we control 63% of the company, which means your board of directors answers to me as much as they answer to you, which means that every decision you make, every paycheck you receive, every ounce of power you think you have, depends on me." Eleanor gripped the edge of the table. "That's impossible," Charles said. "Is it?" I asked. "My family acquired a significant stake in Ashford Industries about 8 years ago. Your father was still alive then. He didn't realize that the investment group he was taking money from was a shell corporation. By the time your family figured out what had happened, the deal was done, legally binding. My family has been running the company from the shadows ever since. You've been running it from the front, yes, but you run it under our terms, with our oversight, with our permission." How did we not know this? Eleanor's voice was barely audible. "Because," I said, "my family has very good lawyers and very good at keeping secrets." Victoria was staring at me. I couldn't read her expression. "Why?" Charles asked. He sat back down in his chair like his legs had given out. "Why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you use this against us?" I thought about that for a moment. About the 5 years of secrecy. About the double life. About the lie I'd been telling the person I loved most in the world. "Because," I said, "it would have made her happy for the wrong reasons. It would have meant that she married me for my money, not for me. And I couldn't bear that." Victoria made a sound, something between a sob and a laugh. "You didn't trust me," she said. "All this time you didn't trust me to love the real you." "I did trust you," I said. "I trusted you to love the man I showed you, and you did. That was enough." But it wasn't enough. Not really. And we both knew it. Charles reached across the table, and for a moment, I thought he was going to try to take back the check. Instead, he just stared at it. "What happens now?" he asked. "Are you going to ruin us?" I looked at him, at Eleanor, at the people who had treated me like nothing for 5 years, and I realized that I didn't want to ruin them. That would be too easy. That would be small. "Nothing happens," I said. "You continue running the company. You continue living your life. But you do it knowing that you never had the power you thought you had. You never controlled anything. You were always playing a game where the rules were set by someone else, someone you looked down on." "Daniel," Victoria said. Her voice was shaking. I stood up. "I think we should leave." "Wait," Eleanor said. "Please, just wait." But I didn't wait. I took Victoria's hand and led her out of that dining room. She was crying the whole way to the car. I didn't speak. What could I say? Everything had changed, but nothing had changed. I was still me. But I was also someone else entirely. In the car, Victoria didn't speak either. She just stared out the window as the city passed by. We drove in silence for what felt like an eternity. "Were you ever going to tell me?" she finally asked. "I don't know," I said. I kept waiting for the right moment, but the right moment never came. "Because there wasn't one," she said. "There isn't a right moment to tell someone you've been lying to them for 5 years. "It wasn't a lie," I said. "It was just an incomplete truth." "That's the same thing," she said. We drove back to our apartment in silence. When we got home, Victoria went straight to bed. I sat on the couch and stared at the wall for hours. The next morning, she was still angry. She had every right to be. "I need you to understand something," she said, standing in the kitchen with her coffee mug. "I don't care that you're rich. I don't care that your family owns some big company. I don't care about any of that. What I care about is that you didn't trust me, with the truth, with who you really are." "I know," I said. "Do you?" she asked. "Because it seems like you just proved that you don't know me at all, that you think I'm the kind of person who only loves you because of your money." "That's not what I think," I said. "Then what do you think?" she asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you think I'm shallow, like you think I'm just like my parents." I didn't have an answer for that, because maybe she was right. Maybe I had been thinking of her that way, at least a little bit. Maybe I had been using the secret as a way to protect myself, to make sure that if she ever left, it wouldn't be because she knew the truth about me. It would be because she chose to. "I'm sorry," I said. "I know," she said, "but I'm not sure if sorry is enough." She left that evening. She said she needed time to think. She went to stay with a friend. I expected her to ask for a divorce. I expected her to tell me that she couldn't trust me anymore. I expected my worst fear to come true. But 2 weeks later, she came home. "I've been thinking," she said, sitting down at the kitchen table, "about everything, about you, about your family, about my parents, and I realized something." "What?" I asked. "That secrets don't make you dishonest," she said. "Secrets just mean you're scared. And I understand being scared. I'm scared all the time. I was scared when I fell in love with you because I knew my family would disapprove. I was scared when I married you because I thought I was throwing away my inheritance. I was scared when we found out I couldn't have children because I thought you'd leave me. But I never stopped being honest with you about being scared." "Victoria," I started. "Let me finish," she said. "You lied to me, and that's not okay. But I understand why you did it, and I've decided that I can forgive you. But only if you promise that we start over, right now. No more secrets, no more incomplete truths, just us. The real us. Whatever that looks like. I pulled her close and held her. I promised her that there would be no more secrets. And I meant it. The next day, I told her everything about my family, about the company, about the boarding schools and the board meetings and the wealth that I'd inherited without earning. I told her about the people I'd met through my family's business and the deals I'd helped orchestrate. I told her the real version of my life, and to my surprise, she didn't judge me for it. She didn't blame me for not telling her sooner. She just listened and asked questions and started to understand the man she'd married more fully. 2 months later, I made a phone call to my father. I told him that I wanted to step back from the company. I told him that I wanted to live a different kind of life. A simpler life. A life where I wasn't hiding anything from anyone. "What will you do instead?" my father asked. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'll figure it out." And I did. Victoria and I decided to use a portion of my family's wealth to start a non-profit organization focused on financial education for low-income families. We wanted to help other people understand the system that had confused and overwhelmed us. We wanted to break the cycle of financial secrecy and shame that we'd both grown up with. Victoria designed the materials. I managed the business side. We worked together as equals for the first time in our marriage. As for my in-laws, they eventually reached out. Not to apologize. Charles and Eleanor weren't the type to apologize, but they reached out to ask if I would stay on as a board member for the company. They wanted my input. They wanted my approval. They wanted my power. I didn't give it to them right away. I made them wait. I made them understand what it felt like to be uncertain, to be powerless, to wonder if someone would decide to destroy you. In the end, I agreed to stay on, but on my terms. And I made sure that my first act as a committed board member was to approve a significant salary increase for all of the company's entry-level employees. I wanted to make sure that no one else would have to live the kind of financial struggle that Victoria and I had endured. Victoria laughed when I told her about the salary increases. "Your family is probably furious," she said. "They're not happy," I admitted, "but they'll get over it." "Or they won't," she said, "and then what?" "Then I'll buy them out," I said simply. "I have the power to do that. I've always had the power to do that. I just didn't know who I was when I had it." She kissed me then. A real kiss. A kiss that meant forgiveness and love and partnership. And I realized that power wasn't about money or control or the ability to make people do what you wanted. Real power was about knowing yourself. It was about being confident enough to walk away from everything you could take because you'd already taken what mattered. My wife, my partner, my equal. That was power. That was everything. So if you take anything away from this story, take this. Your worth is not determined by your financial status. It's not determined by what others think of you. It's determined by who you are when no one is watching, by the choices you make when you have the power to make them, by the love you give to the people around you and the love you allow yourself to receive in return. I spent 5 years as an ordinary man, keeping the truth about my identity hidden. But I wasn't an ordinary man, and I wasn't a special man because of my money. I was special, or at least I became special, the day I chose to be honest about who I was and what I wanted out of life. That's what changed everything. Not the money, not the power, not the revelation at the dinner table, the truth, and the willingness to live it openly no matter what the cost.